You know that feeling, right? That kind of underlying hum of digital noise, the constant distraction, maybe feeling a little scattered, maybe even just a bit less there than you'd like to be.
Oh, absolutely. It's incredibly common today. I mean, this world of infinite scrolling and constant pings, it's all pretty new for human brains.
Yeah, exactly. And it feels like our focus, our energy, maybe even our, sense of well-being is constantly under siege. So we've been given this stack of sources, really fascinating stuff, including insights connected to James Goodwin's work that looks at this exact problem.
And what's really striking about these sources is their core argument, which feels almost paradoxical, doesn't it? They suggest that the path to optimizing our very modern, sort of overwhelmed brains might not be found in the latest app or some new biohack, but actually by understanding and embracing the lifestyle patterns of our ancient ancestors.
Whoa. Okay. So instead of more tech, the answer is less.
Rah.
Or like looking back.
Kind of, yeah. Looking back to understand what our biology actually expects.
Right. So our mission in this deep dive is basically to unpack this idea together. We're going to pull out the most impactful lessons from these sources on how reconnecting with those fundamental human needs, that ancient blueprint, can dramatically improve brain health.
And we're talking sharper focus, better mood, a stronger sense of well-being, maybe more confidence.
Yeah, and the sources even hint this could, help you find a path to a more fulfilling life. A deeper sense of meaning, perhaps.
Exactly. It's about discovering that seemingly simple shifts, grounded in what our biology is actually built for over millions of years, can have truly profound, almost transformative effects on how we feel and function day to day.
Okay, let's dive into what the sources say is actually happening right now, because they paint a pretty stark picture. Our brains and our ability to focus are, under major threat.
They really are. And they identify some key culprits. One big one is excessive exposure to short-form content. Things like TikTok or YouTube Shorts.
Right, the endless scroll.
Yeah. And the sources argue this constant bombardment, it drains our dopamine system.
The quick hit. You get that little reward burst, that little bit of pleasure.
Exactly. But the cost, they say, is significant. This constant seeking of instant gratification, it leads to brain fatigue. It makes it genuinely difficult to engage with or focus on longer tasks.
Like reading a book or even watching a movie without reaching for your phone.
Precisely. Without feeling restless. It actually diminishes your capacity to find that deeper enjoyment in daily life or, sustained work.
And what about the emotional fallout from this kind of brain state?
Well, the sources link it directly to increased feelings of depression, difficulty concentrating, and that pervasive feeling of being zoned out or emotionally numb.
Like your internal world has just softened or got a bit gray.
Yeah, that's a good way to put it, just muted.
And the urgency here, it feels like more than just a personal problem, doesn't it?
It really is. Especially now with the rise of AI, the sources point out that navigating this increasingly complex, data-rich era, it requires strong, resilient, trained brains.
Right.
So neglecting our brain health now is critical because the demands on our cognitive abilities, they're only going to increase. We need to be sharp.
Okay, so if that's the problem, this modern onslaught kind of dulling our ancient brains, what is this ancient blueprint solution the sources champion?
Right, so this is the central argument. They propose that to genuinely thrive, to be happy, successful, and live the life you deeply want, we need to align our modern lives more closely with the environment and patterns our ancestors evolved in.
That sounds almost, too simple. Like, are they saying just go live in a cave?
No, not exactly live in a cave. But the rationale is compelling. Humans evolved over roughly 3 million years in primal environments. Our biology is deeply wired for that setting.
Okay.
Contrast that with things like modern processed foods, refined sugar, hyper-palatable snacks, which are only a few hundred years old in the grand scheme of things. Just a blip.
A tiny blip, yeah.
So the sources suggest that these modern, unnatural behaviors and inputs are fundamentally making us sick, anxious, and unhappy because they clash with our biology.
So the promise is that by consciously choosing behaviors that are appropriate for that ancient design, we can actually unlock untapped potential, physical, mental, emotional capabilities.
That's the core claim, yes. One source even describes these really interesting personal experiences, like unintentional weight loss, maybe 7 kilograms in 3 months, skin clearing up, getting faster and more confident in sports, feeling emotionally happier, even hearing other people say they looked different, cooler, feeling less stressed about aging, maintaining peak condition, and importantly, gaining the confidence to share themselves publicly.
So these aren't just minor health tweaks. They frame them as like profound transformation stemming from this alignment, finding a truer self, maybe.
Exactly. It's presented as a much deeper shift.
Okay, let's really unpack this then. The sources are essentially saying our very biology comes with an instruction manual, right?
Yeah.
Written over millions of years, and we're currently trying to operate outside of it. Ignoring that blueprint has real, measurable consequences.
Precisely. It's about coming back into congruence, into alignment. When we live in ways that resonate with our deep biological history, the sources suggest everything starts to function more optimally, from the, fundamental cellular processes right up to our mood and our deepest cognitive abilities, even perhaps our sense of purpose.
Okay, so what are these specific pillars or practices from the ancient world that the sources say are crucial for brain health today? Let's start with one that feels, well, non-negotiable. Movement.
Movement. Absolute fundamental. The sources explain the evolutionary why. Humans evolved to run. Think about it, hunting, escaping predators on the African savanna.
Right, persistence hunting and all that.
Exactly. Human survival and dominance are intimately linked to our ability for long-distance running. We can't sprint like a cheetah, sure, but we can outlast almost any other animal over distance. Our endurance is key.
So what happens when we replace that fundamental need with, well, what most of us do, sitting at a desk all day?
It's fascinating. The sources suggest that prolonged sitting actually activates the brain's fear center, the amygdala.
Wait, sitting activates my fear center. That sounds completely backward. Why on earth would that be?
This is fascinating, isn't it? The sources don't go into exhaustive neurological detail on this specific point, but the implication seems to be that deep in our ancient programming, stasis or immobility might have signaled danger.
Like being vulnerable, trapped, unable to flee.
Potentially, yeah. So that primal alarm system gets triggered, maybe just at a low level, but this chronic low-level activation can manifest as anxiety, stress, and even, oddly, lead to those comparison thoughts. Am I safe? Am I okay relative to others?
Wow, okay, so moving feels the opposite. It calms that system.
Exactly. The sources say activities like running feel right to the brain. They release serotonin and other neurotransmitters associated with well-being, and they actively reduce stress hormones like cortisol.
So what kind of movement are we talking about to get these benefits? Do I need to run a marathon?
Not necessarily a marathon. The sources recommend aiming for around 20 minutes of movement daily, maybe running or equivalent vigorous activity 3 times a week. The target seems to be around 150, 200 minutes of moderate to vigorous exercise per week total.
Okay, that feels more manageable.
And aerobic exercise specifically increases blood flow to the brain and activates BDNF.
BDNF, right? That's like miracle growth for the brain. Helps grow new connections.
That's a great way to think of it, yeah. Brain-derived neurotrophic factor. It supports the growth and survival of neurons, but strength training is also highlighted.
Oh. How does that fit in?
Particularly for building confidence. Anciently, being strong meant survival, right? In the modern world, the source suggests that physical strength translates into emotional stability and confidence. Feeling capable.
And there's a story in the sources that really brings the movement point home, isn't there?
Yes, the example of the 65-year-old woman who started running at age 50. Think about that, starting at 50. She eventually ran her first marathon at 60.
Incredible.
And the sources emphasize how her memory improved, her mood lifted, and she found this new sense of purpose. It's just a powerful testament to how reactivating that ancient movement pattern can create positive change at any age. It's never too late.
Okay. Moving on from movement, what about what we fuel ourselves with? Nutrition. Feeding your ancient brain.
Ah, yes, another critical pillar. And the sources are quite direct here. Modern processed foods, things like white rice, sugary drinks, refined snacks, they're a major driver of aging faster, feeling stressed, and generally being unhealthy.
So the stuff that's everywhere.
Pretty much. The ancient diet, focusing on natural whole foods like fruits, meat, plants, roots, that's what aligns with our deep biology, especially our gut health.
The gut-brain axis. We hear so much about that now. It feels like it's finally getting the attention it deserves.
And these sources really reinforce its importance. They explain that natural foods, think salads, salmon, sweet potatoes, they foster a balanced gut microbiome. And those microbes, they communicate directly with the brain.
How does that work?
Well, they produce neurotransmitters and other signaling molecules that significantly impact mood and cognitive function. Conversely, processed foods disrupt these microbes, leading to unstable moods, maybe anxiety, and that cognitive fog.
So it's not just about physical health. It's profoundly linked to our mental and emotional state through the gut. It's all connected.
Absolutely, all connected. And the sources offer specific strategies, like drastically reducing refined carbs, white bread, sugary drinks, cutting out snacking between meals, and prioritizing natural whole foods for improved clarity and happiness.
Cutting out snacking. That's a tough one for many people.
It can be, but the idea is to give your digestive system a rest and rely on nutrient-dense meals. They also suggest eating vegetables before other carbs in a meal
Oh, interesting.
to help regulate blood sugar spikes, avoid that big rush and crash. And they warn that a high-sugar breakfast, like sugary cereals or pastries, basically sets you up for cravings and mood swings all day long.
That seems like such a simple but powerful behavioral hack. Veggies first.
It is. The sources also touch on things like a ketogenic diet or intermittent fasting, suggesting maybe trying it 1-2 times per week, fasting for about 15 hours as methods that can increase BDNF and potentially aid weight management.
Right.
And of course, the vitamins and minerals from natural foods, leafy greens, fish, nuts, seeds are presented as absolutely essential building blocks for optimal brain function. You need the raw materials.
Was there a personal story related to nutrition as well? An example.
Yes, the example of the man who struggled with chronic depression. Apparently, his mood saw dramatic improvement after he cut out processed foods and shifted his diet to focus on things like salmon and vegetables.
Wow, that direct a link.
It powerfully illustrates the connection between what we eat and our deepest emotional states. And the host's own example, mentioned in the sources, losing 7 kilograms, clearing skin, gaining confidence just by cutting soda and reducing carbs, it reinforces how accessible and impactful these changes can be for anyone.
Okay, pillar number 3. Sleep. The brain's essential reset button. Feels obvious, but maybe not fully appreciated.
Definitely not fully appreciated. It's non-negotiable. Sleep is the critical time when the brain performs vital maintenance. It detoxifies itself, clearing out metabolic waste products that build up during the day, like taking out the trash.
Brain trash, okay.
Exactly. It's also essential for consolidating memories, locking in what you learned during the day. The sources highlight that chronic lack of quality sleep is linked to an increase in amyloid plaque.
Which is a risk factor for Alzheimer's, right?
That's right, a major risk factor. So sleep isn't just passive rest, it's active cleanup and consolidation. It's crucial work.
So how much do we need?
Getting 7 to 8 hours of quality sleep consistently is foundational for good cognitive function, sustained focus, and emotional resilience. The practical tips are pretty straightforward, things you've probably heard but maybe don't always follow.
Right.
Maintain a consistent sleep schedule, even on weekends if possible. Minimize blue light exposure from screens before bed, put the phone away, and ensure your sleep environment is cool and comfortable, ideally around 18 to 20 degrees Celsius. Dark and quiet too, obviously.
Simple rules, harder to implement sometimes.
Yeah.
Okay, next, stress management and mindfulness. This feels very modern, the mindfulness trend, but you're saying it connects back to the ancient.
It absolutely does. While the terms like mindfulness might be modern, the need to manage stress is ancient. Stress isn't new. The sources explain that chronic stress, the kind many of us experience today, keeps cortisol levels high. And that actually damages key brain areas.
Which areas?
Specifically the hippocampus and the prefrontal cortex.
And what do those parts of the brain do that makes this damage so significant? Why should we care?
Well, the hippocampus is crucial for forming new memories and learning. And the prefrontal cortex, that's our executive control center. It handles complex decision-making, planning, impulse control, regulating social behavior, basically higher-level thinking.
So chronic stress literally makes it harder to remember, plan, and think clearly.
That's what the sources suggest, yes. It impairs those functions. Techniques like meditation, mindfulness, yoga. These practices, the sources say, actively protect these brain areas and help lower those stress hormone levels.
In nature.
Yes, spending time in nature is also deeply aligned with our ancient life. It's highlighted as a powerful stress reducer. It improves focus and mood, just being outdoors.
Which makes intuitive sense. Our ancestors were immersed in nature, not concrete jungles.
Yeah.
What's a simple starting point for this stress management stuff?
The sources suggest even just 10 minutes of simple breathing meditation daily can make a difference, just focusing on your breath.
10 minutes. Okay. Any stories here that stand out?
Yeah, the example of the tech worker who is experiencing significant burnout, just completely fried.
Relatable for many, I bet.
Definitely. They found that incorporating regular hiking in nature dramatically improved their focus and reduced their stress levels, allowing them to overcome that burnout. It shows how returning to that fundamental connection with the natural world can be incredibly restorative for the modern stressed brain.
Okay, social connection is next. We are wired for tribe. That feels deeply true.
It is. Humans are fundamentally social animals. Interaction isn't just pleasant, it stimulates vital emotional circuits in the brain. The sources are really clear. Isolation accelerates both depression and cognitive decline.
So feeling alone isn't just a feeling. It has measurable negative impacts on brain function over time.
According to these sources, yes, it's detrimental. On the flip side, positive social interaction, things like laughter, intimacy, forming close bonds, triggers the release of happy hormones.
Like oxytocin.
Oxytocin, dopamine, serotonin, the feel-good chemicals. And having supportive relationships provides a crucial buffer against stress and contributes massively to emotional stability. We need our people.
So how do we nurture this in today's often isolating world? It feels harder sometimes.
It can be. The sources recommend prioritizing regular in-person meetups with friends and family, not just online stuff. Joining clubs or groups aligned with your interests, volunteering, it's about actively creating and maintaining those tribal connections our brains are literally built for, making the effort.
Right. Okay. Cognitive stimulation and neuroplasticity. This is about keeping the brain active and adaptable, learning new things.
Yes, and this is a very hopeful point from the sources. It really counters that old, outdated notion that cognitive decline is just an inevitable part of aging.
You peak and then it's downhill.
Exactly. These sources emphasize that the brain is incredibly plastic. It can reorganize connections and form new ones throughout life, regardless of age. You absolutely can train your brain like a muscle.
But the flip side?
The flip side is that passive consumption, like endlessly watching only TV or just scrolling short videos, doesn't provide the necessary stimulation. It can actually make the brain dull over time. Use it or lose it, essentially.
So active engagement is the key, not just passive receiving.
Precisely. The sources highlight that learning new things like languages or musical instruments, even later in life, reading challenging material, doing puzzles, and importantly, combining this with physical exercise, all increase BDNF.
There's that BDNF again.
Yes, it actively promotes the growth of new neurons. And combining physical activity and learning, like taking a dance class, is mentioned as particularly beneficial. Building this cognitive reserve helps our brains stay resilient and can help offset the effects of aging.
And the sources give examples of people actually doing this later in life, proving it's possible. It's not just theory.
Absolutely. They reference individuals in their 70s successfully learning new languages or musical instruments. It powerfully demonstrates that this brain plasticity is active and accessible throughout our entire lives. And even just 20-30 minutes of exercise, as we mentioned, is noted to release BDNF, providing that building block.
Okay, now this next one was quite surprising to me when I first read it. Oral health. A deep, perhaps unexpected link to the brain. Tell me about this.
Yeah, it's a connection often overlooked, but the sources really emphasize the importance of the microbes living in our mouths and their impact on overall brain health.
Microbes in the mouth affecting the brain. How?
They state that poor oral hygiene, not brushing or flossing properly, leads to chronic systemic inflammation throughout the body. It doesn't just stay in the mouth.
So inflammation starting in the mouth spreads.
Yes. Gum disease, gingivitis, that's inflammation. And that chronic inflammation, the sources say, increases the risk of depression, anxiety, and even neurodegenerative conditions like Alzheimer's disease down the line.
Wow.
They also note that ancient humans likely had less plaque buildup, partly perhaps due to chewing tougher, more fibrous foods that naturally clean the teeth.
So our modern soft diets might actually be contributing to this problem too.
It's a potential factor, yes. The sources are very direct. Fundamental practices like consistent brushing and flossing, they're not just about preventing cavities or bad breath. They are essential for reducing systemic inflammation and therefore protecting long-term brain health.
And there was a really striking story in the sources that illustrated this point, wasn't there?
Yes, quite a shocking case, really. It detailed a woman who had been suffering from chronic fatigue and debilitating brain fog for a long time. Couldn't figure out why.
Okay.
And these symptoms saw dramatic improvement, almost disappearing entirely, after she made significant improvements to her oral hygiene routine, addressing gum inflammation.
Just from better brushing and flossing.
Essentially, yes, dealing with the underlying oral health issues. It's a powerful, maybe startling example of how foundational these seemingly small habits are and how interconnected our bodily systems truly are, including this mouth-brain link. Don't neglect your teeth.
Okay, so we have this ancient blueprint and these key pillars for living aligned with it. But we do live in this complex, fast-paced modern world. It's not the savannah. How do the sources suggest we navigate the unavoidable challenges? The phone is always there.
Right. And they are realistic about this. They acknowledge the constant presence of things like smartphone addiction, the pressure to multitask all the time, and the sheer volume of information overload we face daily.
It feels impossible to escape sometimes, like you're swimming against the tide.
It can feel that way, and the sources explain the cognitive cost. Excessive screen time, especially that rapid-fire content, it demonstrably reduces our focus and working memory capacity.
Our ability to hold things in mind.
Exactly. And multitasking, while we often feel we're being super efficient, actually burdens the prefrontal cortex. It reduces the depth and quality of our work. The sources argue strongly that monotasking, focusing on one thing at a time, is far more effective and less draining for the brain.
Single tasking. Sounds revolutionary.
Doesn't it? And information overload just swamps our ability to process information effectively and retain it. We're not built for that constant barrage.
So how do we bring this ancient wisdom into this modern environment? What are the practical strategies?
Well, the sources offer some concrete ideas. They suggest implementing digital detox periods, maybe starting small, like just an hour off screens daily, or trying a weekend digital detox. See how it feels.
Okay.
Consciously practicing monotasking. When you're working on something, just work on that. Turn off notifications.
Yeah.
Being highly selective about the information you consume. You don't need to know everything instantly.
Curating your input.
Precisely. They emphasize intentional time management and critically prioritizing genuine rest and recovery. These aren't optional nice-to-haves or luxuries. The sources frame them as necessary defense strategies to protect our ancient, biology-driven brain in this unprecedented modern environment.
Protecting the asset, essentially.
Your most important asset.
And all this ties back powerfully to emotional well-being and, as the sources suggest, a potential for real personal transformation, maybe even finding that deeper meaning.
Absolutely. They strongly reinforce that brain health and emotional well-being are fundamentally one and the same thing. You really can't separate them.
What's the mechanism they describe there? How does brain health translate to feeling good?
The sources explain that positive emotions, feelings like joy, gratitude, contentment, actually activate the prefrontal cortex. Remember, our executive control center.
Right, the planning and decision-making part.
Exactly. So feeling good literally helps us think better, improving creativity, problem-solving, decision-making. Conversely, chronic negative emotional states, like those associated with depression, can actually shrink the volume of the hippocampus over time.
Well, a physical consequence of how we feel consistently. So how do we cultivate the positive side more intentionally?
Based on the sources, practice gratitude. Maybe keeping a daily journal, just writing down a few things you're thankful for. Actively seek out humor, find things to laugh about, and crucially, nurture those positive, supportive relationships we discussed earlier. That social connection pillar is key for emotional resilience.
And you mentioned earlier the sources list some pretty remarkable potential transformations from applying these principles. Can you recap those? Because they sound quite profound.
Yeah, they describe really tangible results that people experience. Things like unintentional weight loss, clearer skin, significant increases in speed and confidence in sports, a profound sense of just emotional happiness and stability.
Feeling better day to day.
Yes, and experiencing others noticing a positive physical or energetic change in them, saying things like, you look different or cooler. Feeling less anxious about the aging process, maintaining peak physical and cognitive condition longer. And importantly, gaining the confidence needed to share one's authentic self publicly, to put yourself out there.
So the sources present these not as just lucky side effects, but as the natural outcome of living in alignment with our fundamental human design.
That's exactly how it's framed. It's the body and brain returning to their optimal state of functioning.
It sounds like aligning with your ancient self allows you to step more fully into your modern potential. It's not just about health in a narrow sense. It's about unlocking a truer, more vibrant version of yourself, finding that fulfillment.
That's the heart of it, I think. It shifts the perspective from just trying to survive the modern world or cope with it to actively thriving in it, based on a foundation that's been tested and refined for millions of years.
And as we wrap up this deep dive, the sources offer a surprisingly simple guiding principle, almost a filter to run decisions through. What was that again?
Yeah, it's presented as the book's core conclusion, almost like a heuristic. Judge your actions by whether they are appropriate for the ancient environment.
That's the test. For pretty much everything. Food, activity, how you spend your time.
That's the claim. The sources give examples. Eating wild strawberries you found foraging. Yes, appropriate for the ancient environment. Grabbing a highly processed snack bar from a vending machine. No, not appropriate.
Okay.
They suggest that using this simple filter is about 95% accurate in predicting whether an action will contribute positively to your brain health and overall happiness.
That's incredibly simplifying. It cuts through a lot of noise. But it can't be easy in practice, right?
Yeah.
Given modern temptations.
Oh, the sources absolutely acknowledge the difficulty. Breaking modern habits, especially something like the deeply ingrained addiction to short videos or sugary foods, is hard, really hard.
Yeah.
It requires conscious effort because while those short videos or sugary snacks offer easy, immediate dopamine hits, the sources argue they actively damage the brain over the long term, leading to that fogginess, lack of focus, and increased vulnerability to depression.
So it's a conscious choice.
Yes.
Easy dopamine now versus long-term well-being and clarity.
That's the trade-off presented. It's a conscious effort to step away from that easy hit for something more substantial, more lasting.
So, to bring it all together then, the core message from these sources seems powerful and ultimately quite hopeful. It's that by understanding and honoring our ancient human needs, moving our bodies, fueling ourselves with natural foods, prioritizing deep sleep, nurturing social connections, finding calm in nature, keeping our minds active,
we can dramatically improve our brain health. And as these sources vividly demonstrate, that foundational brain health is the key. It's not just to thinking clearer or focusing better, but to feeling emotionally stable, building genuine confidence, and ultimately living a more fulfilling, perhaps more meaningful life. It underpins everything else.
And remember, those transformative personal examples we talked about, the physical changes, the boost in confidence, that profound shift in emotional well-being. The sources really make the case that this isn't just about preventing decline as we age. It's about unlocking incredible personal potential that might be dormant right now, just waiting.
And importantly, they emphasize this isn't about achieving perfection overnight or making drastic, overwhelming changes. It's really about starting small. Maybe just think about one thing you heard today from this deep dive, one aspect of that ancient blueprint that resonates with you, something you feel drawn to try incorporating, even in a tiny way.
One small step. So what does this all really mean for us, living now? What if the true path to thriving in our complex, sometimes overwhelming, fast-paced modern world isn't about constantly chasing the next technological leap or the newest trend?
What if it's simpler?
What if it's about rediscovering and reconnecting with a timeless wisdom that is quite literally encoded in our very biology? What ancient part of you is waiting to be awakened?